taking advantage of the rare quiet of this moment to talk to you about a restlessness that persists in the modern soul, a muffled vibration that may be reverberating right now in the silence of your room or in the incessant noise of your mind, because there is a very specific kind of emptiness that doesn't show up in medical diagnoses, that can't be solved with physical rest, vitamins, vacations, or digital distractions, being that subtle emptiness, almost imperceptible at first, of waking up every day, completing each task on the list with surgical precision, responding to every message instantly, showing up where you're expected to show up, smiling in the right photos, and yet, when you close the door of your house, feeling that none of that really touches the substance of who you are. You function with enviable mechanical efficiency, but you lack vital presence, becoming an excellent manager of your own survival, but a terrible inhabitant of your own life. And the cruelest part is that no one teaches you what to do when life simply stops making sense, when the script you blindly followed, that social script of study, work, consume, and retire, loses its validity, and you are left there, suspended in an abyss without direction, staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m, questioning the validity of everything you have built. Seneca lived in Rome more than 2,000 years ago, surrounded by the decadent luxury of an empire at its peak and the corruptible power of insane emperors. He was not a monk isolated in a cave, but a man of the world, a politician, a playwright, one of the richest men of his time who also knew exile, loss, envy, illness, and that same feeling of futility that reaches us today, centuries later, when we look at our bright screens and feel alone. For he saw the fragility of fame, the volatility of fortune, and the certainty of death up close, long before being forced to commit suicide by order of Nero, a fate he faced with a calmness that validated his entire philosophy. Perhaps because he lived in the eye of the storm, he developed tools so practical, so brutal, and so honest for dealing with the existential void, knowing that luxury does not fill the soul, and that constant occupation is merely a drug to anesthetize the anguish of living. In our last meeting, I brought Albert Camus into the conversation, talking about the absurdity of existence and how life doesn't carry an intrinsic meaning written in the stars. But today I want to present you with another answer to that same abyss, an answer that doesn't deny chaos but also doesn't conform to mere passive acceptance. Because while Camus looks at the absurd and says accept that nothing has meaning and live intensely as an act of rebellion, Seneca looks at that same void and asks with the serenity of someone who has seen everything, what are you doing with your time, with your vital energy, with the limited and precious days you have left? The difference is subtle, but monumental in its practical effects, because while one frees you from the crushing weight of seeking a universal cosmic meaning, Seneca teaches you to construct a relative, personal, ethical, and sustainable meaning, something you can use as a compass in your daily life. He doesn't deny that the world is chaotic or that injustice reigns, but he offers a Stoic way to reorganize life based on what is strictly under your control. This transforms the texture of reality, because it's one thing to accept the absurd and continue living despite it, and it's something completely different to recognize that absurdity, look it in the eye without blinking, and decide that, although you can't control the chaos of the universe, the economy, politics, or the moods of others, you can decide with surgical precision how you use your time and mind within that chaos. Living at this crossroads, you experience the abysmal difference between merely surviving the days as a passive passenger and truly inhabiting your own life with sovereign intention. Stoic philosophy, often misinterpreted as cold resignation or a lack of emotion, is actually a system of flourishing under pressure. It doesn't promise easy answers, doesn't offer magic solutions, mystical rituals, or instant happiness pills, but delivers something infinitely more valuable, a paved path to reclaiming agency over one's own existence. And when you begin to walk that path, applying these tools to the raw flesh of reality, something changes, not dramatically like in the movies, but profoundly, silently, and lastingly, like a root that grows strong in the darkness of the earth before supporting a great tree. Seneca offers a surgical diagnosis in his treatise on the shortness of life, presenting an uncomfortable truth. It is not that we have little time, but that we waste too much. Life is long enough and has been given to us with sufficient generosity for the accomplishment of the greatest things if we use it wisely. But when it is wasted in luxury, negligence, concern with the lives of others, and indifference to one's own soul, when it is not spent on anything good but dissipated in trivialities, then finally constrained by the ultimate inevitability of death, we feel that it has already passed us by without us realizing it was passing. This reveals that life is not short. We are the ones who make it short, not by being devoid of time, but by being prodigal in wasting it. Seneca brilliantly compares time to money, saying that an immense fortune, when it falls into the hands of an irresponsible owner, is dissipated in an instant, but a modest sum, if entrusted to a prudent guardian, grows with use, just as our life is amply sufficient for those who know how to use it. And then comes the painful question, what are you using to fill your days? We live in an era of chronic busyness, where people live exhausted, rushing from one commitment to another as if speed were synonymous with purpose, flaunting their tiredness like a badge of honor, but occupied with obligations they didn't choose and expectations that aren't theirs, resulting in an empty and sterile weariness at the end of the day, where nothing that was done truly mattered to the essence or built. Something worth remembering, just another day burned in the bonfire of vanities. When you realize you're wasting days and days this way, the terrifying feeling arises that life is meaningless. But the problem may not be life itself, but rather the fact that you're living the wrong life, suggesting that the emptiness you feel isn't a lack of meaning, but an excess of futility, a noise that drowns out the music of your own existence. Seneca says that before setting out in search of purpose, you need to do a deep cleansing, a negative path, looking at your routine and asking what is consuming you without giving you anything back, what you do simply out of inertia or because someone expects it of you. Frightening questions that, when answered honestly, reveal that a good part of your life doesn't belong to you, as it has been mortgaged to fill gaps created by other people. And in the midst of all this, you've completely lost yourself, becoming an executive of other people's tasks, but ceasing to be the author of your own narrative, a painful realization that is the first inescapable step towards transformation. You can't fix what you don't see. You can't change what you don't admit. And perhaps this is the moment to honestly look at your life and admit that something needs to change, that you can't keep pretending, because this feeling of emptiness won't disappear on its own. And here's the point that many people have outsourced their own existence without realizing it, handing control of their lives over to their boss, algorithms, family, and social standards, living a sequence of responses to what others want, which Seneca defines as not living but being lived, a supporting actor in someone else's movie. Seneca teaches that true freedom is not doing whatever one wants like a spoiled tyrant, but not being a slave to what one doesn't want, the capacity for autarky and self-governance. When you regain the ability to say no, when you consciously choose where to invest your limited energy, the gravity shifts and you cease to be a victim of circumstances, becoming an active participant. This restores the essential feeling of being in control, even if it's the command of a small boat on a vast ocean, where you don't control the waves but decide where to point the sail. For meaning without freedom is merely disguised obedience. One of the forces that most crushes people today is the tyranny of expectations and the trap of comparison, living under the weight of what should be, creating constant pressure that robs the pleasure of the present. Nothing is ever enough, and you always feel short of the imagined ideal, measuring your real, confused, and organic life with the wrong yardstick of a perfectly edited fantasy. Seneca classifies this as the greatest source of human suffering, suffering more in imagination than in reality. Social media has amplified this in a toxic way, showing edited snippets and achievements out of context, making us look at our own lives and think we are failing, a lie, and a collective hallucination that demands we stop playing this game, stop measuring life by external standards and expecting existence to fit into molds created by the market. This is a difficult task because these expectations are ingrained in us, but separating what you truly want from what you have been taught to want is the true great work of personal alchemy. The Stoic answer to this dilemma demands the courage to disappoint others so as not to disappoint oneself, inviting a voluntary simplicity, cutting out the excess and reducing the noise to recover the meaning of life, which leads us to the urgent need to reassess how we spend the only currency we can never get back: time. And this dive into the question of time and death is where life gains its weight and inestimable value. Seneca regularly practiced memento mori, the remembrance of death, not as something morbid or depressing, but as the ultimate tool for clarity, because death is the only absolute certainty we have, the final horizon that gives perspective to everything. And when you ignore death, you tend to live as if you had infinite time, postponing dreams, tolerating abuses, and wasting hours on nonsense. But when you bring death closer into daily consciousness, futility evaporates, because in the face of the end, petty squabbles lose their importance, the opinions of others become irrelevant, and the fear of failure diminishes in the face of the fear of not having lived. The awareness of death distills life until only the essential remains, forcing the brutal question of whether, if today were your last day, you would be satisfied with what you did, with who you became, with the words you said, not to generate panic, but to generate presence, urgency, and life. For those who fear death have never truly lived, while those who live each day as a whole life with a beginning, middle, and end do not fear the end, for they are already complete. The reconstruction of meaning, therefore, involves treating time as something sacred, protecting it with the same ferocity with which we protect our money or our children, learning to say no to what is not essential, to close doors that lead nowhere, and to refuse invitations that only drain the soul, understanding that every yes you say to something trivial is a no. You are saying to something vital, to your health, your peace, or your purpose. But how to live in this chaotic world without going crazy, how to stay on course when everything seems to crumble. And here Seneca gives us the inner citadel, the concept that your mind should be an impregnable fortress where external chaos cannot enter without your permission, based on the dichotomy of control, the fundamental distinction between what depends on us and what does not. Under our control are our opinions, our aspirations, our desires, and our aversions, that is, everything that is our own creation, while outside our control are our bodies, possessions, reputation, public office, the weather, the economy, the past, the future, and the actions of others. Anxiety almost always arises from trying to control the uncontrollable, from wanting the world to bend to our desires, from suffering over what others think or what might happen tomorrow. The Stoic focuses all their energy on what they control, their own choices, their character, and their response to events, accepting the rest as one accepts the weather. You can't stop it from raining, but you can choose not to get emotionally wet. You can choose to take an umbrella or dance in the rain. This shift in focus lifts a ton of weight off your shoulders because you cease to be responsible for the universe and become responsible only for yourself, which is already a gigantic task. And what guides these choices within the citadel? Virtue. For Seneca, a meaningful life is not a life of hedonistic pleasures nor of fame or wealth, but a life of integrity, where virtue is the only true good, composed of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. To live meaningfully is to act correctly, even when no one is watching. To be just even when it would be advantageous to be unjust. To have the courage to face pain and fear in the name of what is right. To have the temperance not to be enslaved by desires. For character is the only thing we truly possess, the only thing that cannot be taken from us by fire, ruin, or a tyrant. When you base your sense of worth on your integrity and not on your external successes, you become invincible, because the world can take away your money, your reputation, and your health, but it cannot force you to be a bad person. It cannot corrupt your soul unless you allow it, and this moral self-sufficiency is the source of unshakable tranquility. Seneca also knew that the human mind needs rest and cultivation, recommending the practice of deep reading and conversation with the great dead, because when we read philosophers, we are not only learning concepts, we are being adopted by these great souls, gaining access to a wisdom that transcends time, allowing us to choose our spiritual parents and inherit their intellectual wealth. He also advocated contact with nature and the importance of creative idleness, because the mind, like a field, cannot produce abundant harvests if it is not left fallow from time to time, needing silence to hear itself, space to expand, and to maintain this course, he prescribed daily self-examination, asking oneself at the end of each day what evil one cured today, what vice one resisted, and in what way one improved. A practice of moral accounting that ensures we are not living on autopilot, but correcting course, learning from mistakes and celebrating the small victories of virtue. Life also demands the premeditation of evils. The premeditation of evil. This isn't pessimism, but an emotional vaccine. By visualizing potential challenges, loss, betrayal, and hardship, you remove the shock value of the future and prepare to face it with dignity. The anticipated blow arrives more gently, and life won't surprise us if we're always ready for changes in fortune. But above all, Seneca teaches us about friendship and human connection. Although the wise person is self-sufficient in their happiness, they desire friends, neighbors, and companions, not to take advantage of them, but to have someone to love, someone to sacrifice for, someone to share life with. Stoicism isn't cold solitude, it's disciplined love. Understanding that we are social animals and that part of our purpose comes from contributing to the common good, from being useful to others. Therefore, according to Seneca, the answer to emptiness is a deliberate reconstruction. Stop wasting your time on trivialities. Stop living for the expectations of others. Remember your mortality to focus on what is essential. Differentiate what you control from what you don't control. Cultivate virtue and character above fame and money. Find rest in wisdom and nature, and serve humanity with justice and kindness. Life regains meaning when you take ownership of it, when you stop being a passive spectator of your own destiny and firmly grasp the pen, because the blank pages that remain are yours to fill. And it doesn't matter what has been written so far. It doesn't matter the mistakes, the smudges, or the torn pages. What matters is the next line, the next choice, the present moment. Meaning is not something you find ready-made under a stone. It is something you build brick by brick, choice by choice, day after day. And this construction is laborious, requires constant vigilance, requires effort, but it is the only construction that withstands time and death. Don't wait for the world to give you a purpose because the world is indifferent. Give your world a purpose, and that purpose is to be the best human version you can be, here and now, in the exact circumstances you find yourself in, because there is no better place to start than where you are, and there is no better time than now. Life is, and always has been, a do-it-yourself project, and Seneca is by your side, whispering through the centuries that you are capable, that the strength you seek is not outside, but within, in your reason, in your will, in your divine capacity to transform chaos into order, suffering into learning, and time into life. So take a deep breath, look around, perceive the absurd miracle of existence and begin, because while we are postponing, life passes by, and most of it already belongs to death. But the present, this fleeting and powerful instant, belongs to you. Use it.